All right. So we've all been there, coming up the ranks, our bosses convincing us how we should work harder, work longer hours, work after hours, work in the weekends, and it's going to benefit you. So the topic today is, should you work extra hours, unpaid hours for your job?
No.
I agree, but I'll have you elaborate first.
I mean, okay. When you first start out, when I was, 15 years ago, yes, I used to do that. Absolutely. But now I've learned to work smarter, not harder, not longer. And I think after a certain time, when you get a lot of experience and you're earning a salary, they're paying you for your experience. So if I can do something that's going to take me half the time that somebody junior is doing it, I'm going to do it in half the time, and I'm not going to work extra hours because you're newer and it's taking you longer. Also, I think there needs to be like work-life balance. So I try very hard to not bring my personal life into work. So when it's my personal time, I'm not going to bring my work into my personal life. So no, I don't think you should.
So I tend to agree with you. I'll put in my 2 cents in a second, but the boss often says, even if you try to convince them that, hey, I'm working smarter, they're looking at the clock and they want both. They want you to work smarter and they want you to work longer, right? So, that's you. You just mentioned 15 years ago, you used to do that. Now you're more confident. You have more experience. Mm-hmm. You can, say that and without the fear of if they let you go, you can find another job, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you convince someone that's kind of coming up the ranks, maybe younger family, they don't have all the experience? How do you convince them to say the same thing to their boss?
How do I convince them? Well, I think it's going to come in time. They will have to prove themselves. If you're saying, I don't want to work past 5 o'clock because I have ABC, then if your shift starts or your day starts at 9, then you need to be there at 9. You need to do things like not take an extended break, not take an extended lunch. So when you're there, and if your work week is 7.5 hours, you're giving them the 7.5 hours that you're supposed to be giving them, as opposed to having to extend your day. And I'm not saying that you don't do it when necessary, but don't let it become the expectation, because if you do it all the time, it's not the expectation that you're going to put in all these extra hours, and you may not even get compensated for it. Because I know this year I didn't get a raise and I was working, 10-hour days. So now I stop and I work when my work day is done. I'm done.
So if you were to get a raise, would you be more inclined to work those extra hours? Or is it just because of the current situation
it's a trap.
That we're in right
Don't
now?
fall for it.
If I was to get a raise, would I be more inclined? I would say I wouldn't feel, if I had something that was a deadline and I needed to deliver for the customer, I would put in the time and I won't be as bitter about it. I think it's just more so changing my mindset, because I haven't gotten, like, I did amazing on a project. I got things delivered on time, under budget, and made the company money. And then come raise time, they're like, oh, there's a pay freeze. So you're not going to get any more of my extra time. That's just.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's such an old-fashioned mindset, and it's kind of tied closely with presenteeism. It's not about the quality of work. It's about being there for long hours and being seen doing so. Now, to your point, I think if you cultivate a environment that's healthy and encourages people, I think they're going to have no problem staying late to finish a job. When I was younger, I liked what I did. I would come in on weekends because it just felt more relaxing. I wasn't concerned about putting in the extra hours and like, oh, are they taking advantage of me? I'm like, no, this job is fun. I'm going to put in the hours that I think it takes to complete it. And I enjoyed doing that. So I think if you kind of build up the employee to love what they do, don't come out right from the outset and say, hey, you know what, we need you to stay late and put in extra time. That's kind of, manipulative, right?
So what happens when you're doing the work of two people?
I mean, it's tough, and especially for young people. Like when you get in that position, how do you kind of get out of it? You don't really have a choice, right? That's why it's so manipulative to bring someone in, maybe someone who's not used to standing up for themselves.
Yeah.
People who
I think in certain industries, you see it a lot more. I know a lot of my friends that went into the finance route and wanted to be a CA, a chartered accountant, or in anywhere in finance or accounting, where if for $35K a year, they're very talented, university educated, accounting degree with some post graduate kind of certificates and different certifications. They would work like long hours, right? Long hours, working the weekends, and their attitude was, well, if you don't want this job, there's another 500 people behind you that wants it, right? So I think accounting's one field, legal is another field, maybe graphics design. There's certain fields, IT kind of. There's certain fields that basically, when you're coming up more entry level, they do have you work a lot more.
Yeah, like an articling student. But to me, that they're taking advantage of you.
Yeah. What do you think, Kurt?
I agree with him, but there's so many variables with this question because it really depends on what's due at the time. You mentioned with regards to certain projects that might be coming, or in finance, it's very common because I was in finance and there'll be certain deadlines in order to, put a proposal together to get, a dealer on board with their financing. I had to stay late, sometimes 5 hours late to get that presentation done correctly, and it had to be done right. So I'm putting the work in knowing that there's going to be a benefit at the end of it. Because what happens is if you don't get that done by a certain time, that person can go to another potential vendor for your services. So yeah, there's going to be deadlines, but there could be a trade-off. And what I mean by that is that I had a supervisor who was very understanding. He knew that he asked a lot of me, but there'd be times where, you know what, just leave early Friday. Don't worry about it. So there's a trade-off there. So yeah, I might be putting the extra hours, maybe Monday, Tuesday to get things done. But then because he couldn't pay me, he would allow me to leave a bit earlier. So from that standpoint, it's a give and take. But if it's a situation where the expectation is that you're going to work 11 hours a day, I'm only going to pay you for 8, and you can do nothing about it, then that's wrong.
Right. And I see that a lot. And you mentioned, what was it? Presenteeism, right? Is that an actual word?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I love that because I see it. So, my background early in my career is in IT. And yeah, there were times I had to work, longer, or if there was a project or some deployment of a server or some new technology, I would have to kind of work extra. But I always try to balance it. Companies would convince you to work longer, but I've never really, believed in it. At times you have to, just part of your job. But if it's something that's regular, where you're doing the job of 2 people, or just because the competition is so high and they, employers think that they could take advantage of you, I don't agree. But, if you're in graphics design, if you're in accounting, different fields, you kind of have to, depending on, the deadline or what the situation is. But certain fields, when you kind of get into more executive management, senior management, I don't think I have to work, 40, 50, 60 hours physically in the office. I'm available for a lot more, but I usually don't work more than 40 hours in the office, right? But you have one type of leaders that they stay in the office, 10 hours a day, and they try to convince you and others that they're putting more value in, right?
Yeah, because they're sitting there.
Yeah, and then they're sitting there doing things. So I've never been a fan, and it's hard to win that because it's an easy thing to say, I'm here all the time, right? But
what are you doing? Let me look at your surfing history.
Yeah, well, exactly. or how do I minimize my time at the office and come home and spend time with the family, or if I have other things to do, I shut off. I try to focus on important things. I mentioned in previous podcasts, focusing on important things. So there's so many tempting discussions that happens on a daily basis at work. Who got fired, why they got fired, what they do, who fought, and all these topics basically are just traps for killing 45 minutes, right? 30 minutes here. We probably spend, a lot of people spend 1, 2, 3 hours a day just chatting, right?
Unless you're talking about this podcast, then do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But he mentioned it, when you come on a weekend, you're completely isolated to get things done without those distractions, right? But
But you shouldn't have to do that. Give up your week. And where did
No.
that get you when you used to go into the job on the weekend?
I loved it.
So you loved your job.
I did, yeah.
Okay,
It
and
was,
maybe that's the difference. You didn't feel like you were working.
It was. And to Kurt's point, he had a boss who recognized that. So a lot of the bosses, the ones who believe in presenteeism and seeing people in the office and think, oh, well, I come in even when I'm sick. I'm always here. They're the ones who push this kind of agenda, right? Kurt's boss was great. He recognized that, hey, you put in a lot of hours. Why don't you take some time off? There's give and take, there's balance that you need.
Exactly.
So I recognize the work. So that's the kind of culture you need. If you're expecting people to occasionally put in 10 plus hours a day, or maybe work on weekends, right? So you have to encourage them.
yeah, and to add to what you said, Zahid, you said some of these managers were staying at work late. I realized a lot of them just didn't want to go home.
Yeah.
No, that's
You know what
exactly
it is? They're in a position of power in the office.
Right.
But as soon as they go home, they're no longer in a position
Correct.
of power. And I've seen it.
That is very
right.
astute.
So I thought they were working.
Yeah.
No, they were just delaying,
Yeah.
not going home.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, exactly. Like whenever the clock strikes, I just want to get the heck out of there, go home as quickly as possible to my family. I'm still available, but I just don't see the point on just staying extra hours. Just be seen. And people will try to say, well, that's a bad example, and you've got to stay. Like I'm not sure, right? I'm sure. Unless you want to build that culture of quantity equals quality, or quantity equals more value. But if you're in the business of growing and expansion and new ideas, it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
I agree with that. It should be about quality. And if I can do something that would take somebody 10 hours to do, if I can do it in 4 hours.
that's true. Because there's a lot of companies that are so focused on the hours and not looking at
the productivity.
Right?
Exactly.
They need to look how much work's getting done by one employee and not, force them to continue working extra hours just because, I don't know, Paul can't keep up. Right. And that's the problem sometimes.
Right.
I remember I had this one person, years ago that reported to me, and she would be staying late. She came in later to begin with because of traffic. So we allowed that flexibility. I was one of those managers, like, yes, the company says you have to put in 37 and a half hours a week, but as long as you're there during core business hours. So if you wanted to come in 10 to 6 because of where you're coming from. But then I would have HR saying, she's here 8, 9 o'clock at night. And I'm like, when I walk by her desk, she's on Simon's. So shopping online. And you don't want me to say you can't shop online because HR would tell me I'm being harsh. Yeah. But that's why she's here 10, 12 hours a day, because
and she doesn't want to go home probably, right? As Kurt said.
So
okay.
I guess it kind of goes back to the culture, but I just think if, again, it depends on the industry. If you're, like an articling student, graphic design, or you're making video games where there's a deadline, it's going to go with the territory. But I think if you're some jobs, like if you're setting the precedent that you're always going to be there late doing the work of 2 people, then you're just setting yourself up that's what they're going to expect from you all the time.